Hey there, Aubrey. How are you today?
I'm great, Lindsay. Question for you. Are you
Okay.
a saver or a spender?
I'm not really much of a spender. Like, I don't go shopping. I don't buy clothes.
Mm,
So I end up just kind of saving because I'm not really that interested in buying stuff. But I will
I'm the
spend
same,
money on experiences, right? Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
depends on what it is. I'm not a
Yeah.
shopper. So
Mm.
I think often when people think about this question, saver, spender, we think about shopping. Like,
Mhm.
do I buy frivolously? But when it comes to travel or maybe like dining, sometimes I do like to go to a nice restaurant and then maybe I am more of a spender than a saver.
I like it too. I like to go to nice restaurants because I want the experience. I want a glass of wine. I want a nice meal.
Yeah.
I want to socialize with friends. You
Yes.
know, you're getting
Yeah.
so much more when you're investing in experiences. So, this is a great. What are we getting into today,
Yeah,
Aubrey?
so this was one of the questions, the conversation starters in Open Conversation Club last
Mhm.
week, and it sparked a really interesting conversation because one of the we were talking about cheap, a person being described as cheap and the
Mm,
difference between that and frugal, and they were
yeah.
asking what is the opposite of cheap? And
Yes.
everyone was googling it and seeing all of these words that the internet was giving us. I'm like that doesn't really mean the opposite of cheap. So we want to
Yes.
share that vocabulary today that was so fascinating so that you guys, because this is interesting it's an interesting way to connect to describe yourself, your spending habits, and those people that you know.
Yeah, and it's important to be clear, especially if we're describing
Oh.
other people, to be
Mm.
clear, for sure. So, guys, if you're wondering what OCC is, Open Conversation Club, this is a special bonus for listeners, students in our courses. You get invited to come and practice conversation with us, with other students in small groups and large groups at Open Conversation Club when you join one of our courses.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they're every week, sometimes twice a week. It is
Yes.
so fun. Great conversations, excellent
Mhm.
opportunities to meet speaking partners and practice speaking English. And with us, the
Yes.
hosts of Allers English, it is
I
so
know.
fun. I look
Yeah.
forward to it every week.
It's really cool. Like this week, I was able to do 2 or 3 hot seats where I pull one lucky student out of the break room to speak with me. It's a really cool benefit, right?
So
Of
fun.
being in our courses. You get to
And we
speak
love
one
getting
on
to know
one.
you, right? That's one of the
Yes.
downsides of podcasting. We don't get
Yeah.
to know you, our listeners, as much as we'd like. So it's
Yes.
always so exciting for us when you are in one of our courses and get to come to these live speaking events.
Amazing. Aubrey, let's get into just defining some key terms because this does say a lot about lifestyle, about values. What is the most important word for today that we're talking about in the episode?
Exactly.
Mhm.
So first is the word cheap, which
Mhm.
mean there are different meanings, right? If you're describing a thing as cheap, it means inexpensive. That's not
Mhm.
what we're talking about today. We're talking about when you describe a person as cheap, which
Mhm.
means stingy, miserly. These are also words they
Yeah.
don't like to spend money, often at the risk of looking bad, right? Of
Yes.
looking, losing face is what we will say. Sometimes this is an idiom. Um,
Mhm.
this it's very has a very negative connotation. I would not want someone to call me cheap. What about you, Lindsay?
Absolutely not. You want to avoid that at all costs. I mean, I know that within my partner's social circle, my partner's sister had a friend, and somehow this guy's name was, let's call him Dan. It's not his real name, but he got the label Cheap Dan.
Oh
And I'm
no.
like, oh no, what happened? What did he do? How did he get that
What?
label? They just go, Cheap Dan. Are we going to invite Cheap Dan today?
He probably never paid for his own meal, right? He's, oh, I forgot my wallet. Cheap down,
I
always
don't
forgets his wallet.
I hope maybe he's revised his ways,
That's
but you do not
funny.
want that label for sure.
No, exactly. So
Um,
that it was interesting because I was sharing with them this other vocabulary we're going to share because I don't like saving money, but
yeah,
I consider myself to be a frugal person.
yeah,
This does not have the negative connotation that cheap has. In
yeah,
some ways, practically, in practical application, it might look the same sometimes, right?
yes,
Someone might say that I'm too cheap to buy a lot of new clothes. I would say that I'm frugal. This means
yeah,
sparing or economical with money.
right. It's the weird thing about money. It means something different for everyone, right? It means different things. People see it with a different lens. So they might see you as cheap because you don't buy new clothes, but
Right?
you see it as strategic spending, right? Frugal.
Yes.
You want to spend that money on something different, right?
Exactly. I
Yeah.
just think I'm wise with money,
Yeah.
right? I'm
Yeah.
frugal and there are things that I will, like you said, with travel. I'm not
Yeah.
as frugal when it comes to travel. I might want to
Yes.
stay in a nicer hotel or fly
Yeah.
first class. We'll see. But when it comes to like clothing, I'm very frugal.
Or just book that extra trip, the 3rd trip of the
Yes,
year, right? You wanna book that trip
exactly.
and not
Right.
stay home. I do wanna mention something about the word miserly because when I look
Mm.
at it, the pronunciation is miserly, but for our listeners, if you have the transcripts today, it looks like the beginning
Mm.
of miserable or,
Oh.
commiserate. It feels like it should be miserly, but it's not,
That's
right?
true. This is
Mm.
interesting. The word miser as a noun, spelled
Mhm.
miser, is a person who is cheap. I think of
Mhm.
Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. He is
Mhm.
called in that Charles Dickens book a
Mhm.
miser because
Yes.
he is not generous. He won't
Yeah.
spend money, both on himself and on others. And this
Mhm.
adjective, you're right, is spelled miserly. Hopefully, you guys have the transcripts.
Yes.
It's not really pronounced the way you would expect.
I love it. So good to know. So, did we got that sample sentence? Are we ready for number 2, frugal, Aubrey?
Yeah, we did frugal, right? I
Yes.
shared
Or
this,
next one. Sorry.
sparing, economical, but the next one
Yes.
is thrifty. What
Yes,
does thrifty mean, Lindsay?
thrifty. Well, it's the name of a rental car company that I can think of, but
And an
it
ice
really
cream place. There are
and an
thrifty
ice
ice
cream
cream
place.
places in Mexico all over the
I
place.
lo Oh, interesting. It is
Mhm.
using money and other resources carefully and not wastefully, right? So he's always been thrifty, or she's really thrifty and mends torn clothing rather than throwing it out. Yeah.
Right. So if you shop at
Mhm.
thrift stores, someone might
Mhm.
say you're thrifty, right? You don't
Mhm.
mind thrifting is the verb. Like you are willing to try and repurpose clothing or
Mm.
other items rather than just throwing it away and buying new.
Yeah, and a lot of this has to do with our generation. Like, I know my mom's mom, was around in the Great Depression and
Yeah.
I'm sure you too, right?
Yes.
So her mom
Very thrifty.
used to save rubber bands. I mean, save everything, plastic
Yes.
bags, there was no throwing out. So my mom, when I was growing up, she would always, sew our clothing for us instead of just throwing it out. But I think now, I mean, I'll speak for myself, like, it's a throwing out generation, right? We just kind of I don't know how to sew. That has not been carried. She tried to teach me how to sew, and I just was not interested.
And it
Yeah,
was lost with me because my
yeah,
mom taught me how to mend, how to sew. I can make clothing, I can use a sewing machine, but I have not passed that on to my children. I
yes,
don't necessarily have the patience and they have no interest. So
yeah,
they now are probably not going to mend. They can like stitch a little hole,
yeah,
but most
yeah.
of the time they're just going to get rid of it.
I mean, it's just what we've been through. What are the big shock waves that have been set through the economy as we've been in our formative years? That's what determines a lot of times how
Right.
we deal with money, right? Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
And now
Okay.
time is money. They're like, I don't want to take the time to fix that.
Yeah,
I'm going to
time is
throw it
money.
out, buy something
Right.
new.
Right. So, Aubrey, there's, what would you say then? I'll just ask you the question: what's the opposite of cheap?
Yeah, so this was really interesting. Students in Open Conversation Club asked this, and I had to think about it a second. And we were Googling, and online, the results you will get will say generous, liberal, charitable, bountiful, open handed, all of these adjectives. If you ask, what is the opposite of cheap? None of these are correct because the word cheap has such a negative connotation of
Mhm.
being stingy. And
Right.
there really isn't a word that means the opposite of that. We would just say not cheap. Is he cheap?
Right.
No, he's not cheap.
Mhm,
Right.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so it's
mhm.
interesting because this does happen in English and in every language that sometimes there isn't a really direct opposite, especially for something that has a connotation like this
Yeah.
negative connotation. Sometimes the
Mhm.
opposite is just not that, whatever it is.
Not something sometimes that's true. I mean, the word
Yeah.
generous is close, but it doesn't necessarily mean exactly the opposite, right? But what are some sample sentences here, Aubrey?
Yeah. So, for example, he's not cheap. He always pays for his meal when we go out, or
Mhm,
they're not cheap. They always tip generously. But it's
mhm.
interesting because I agree, generous is similar, right? That means to
Yeah.
give more of something than is necessary or expected.
Mhm.
Time, money. So the opposite of like someone who doesn't tip servers could be
Yeah.
called cheap. And
Right.
then maybe someone who does tip a lot would be called generous. But
Yeah.
this can exist in the same person. Someone that you might call cheap could be very
Yeah.
generous in other ways, right?
Right. So that's why I mean, humans are not simple. If I've
Exactly.
learned
We
anything in the
need
last few years,
multitudes.
yes. People are extremely, contradicting of
Yeah,
themselves in their actions. Everyone
exactly.
is, and we all have our weird contradictions and, idiosyncrasies, right? So that is
Right.
absolutely true. But you might just use it, talk about the situation itself, like, he's a good tipper, right? In that exact
Right.
situation, you might say, "He's not cheap,
Exactly.
he's a good tipper." right?
Exactly. Right.
Mhm.
But often, like, I think it's important to think about this, that when you're looking for opposites in English, you are going to get, if you look at the thesaurus, you look at all of these adjectives, they all will have a specific meaning, right? They all
Mhm.
have these slightly different meanings, and you can't just assume that they all mean the exact opposite, because so many words have these implications, have these connotations. So if you
Mhm.
call someone cheap, that's actually quite rude and offensive. And
Yes.
if it's true, okay. But if not, you could really, I would hate to be called cheap.
Yeah, like I always said at the top of the show, my sister-in-law would never call Cheap Dan to his
To his
face,
face.
right? "Hey, Cheap Dan,
Right.
welcome to the party. Glad you're here." No,
Right, it's
um
just too mean, and often people who are cheap don't realize it about themselves. They would probably call
yes.
themselves frugal.
Mhm,
They think of
mhm.
themselves as frugal. So this is really interesting, but if you were to need the opposite, if someone asks you like, "Oh, is that guy cheap?" and you wanna say that he's not, you would just say, "No, he's not cheap."
I agree. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I love it. And then the word lavish.
Yeah, so these
Lavish.
came up too, both lavish and extravagant came up as opposites when we're
Yeah.
looking for the opposite of stingy. This means more like spending money freely, and
Mhm,
we often use it to describe like parties, restaurants. The ballroom is so lavish,
mhm.
the chandelier's gigantic, or extravagant meals. Like, wow, that 12-course meal was extravagant. Means like
Mhm.
a lot of money was spent freely on it. I
Yes.
wouldn't use either of these as the opposite of cheap. If someone's not cheap, I wouldn't say, no, they're lavish, they're extravagant. So
Yeah.
it's really tricky. You just can't always trust the internet. If the like they gave the
Mhm.
internet they gave
That's
this
right.
as the
Mhm.
opposite, and I beg to differ.
Yeah, we did an episode over on IELTS Energy about staying away, being careful with forums when we're asking questions. You need
Yeah,
context. Today, we're giving you the context, right? It's all about
exactly.
context. Love
Yep.
it. Okay, Aubrey, let's dive into a role play to make this super clear for our listeners.
All right, you and I are
So,
discussing our friends' spending habits in this role play. I'll start
all
us out.
right, here we go.
I don't want to call Mark cheap, but I think he's pretty loath to spend his money.
Yeah, I get that impression. I'm frugal, but I try not to be cheap.
Same, especially when it comes to clothes. I've always been thrifty. Travel
Mhm.
too. I try to find budget flights and hotels.
You're a generous person. You'd pay every time we go to lunch if I let you.
Oh,
Nice.
I love
Nice.
this, bonus, loathe. It means, like,
Yes.
reluctant or
It's a
unwilling, and we will
really
just use it conversationally like this, but it's,
Mhm.
a little less common, I'd
I
say.
think it's very high level,
I
actually.
agree. Yeah.
Super high level, like C1, B2, C1 level. But if our listeners, if you guys can put that into your speech, it is a marker of just sophisticated speaking,
Yeah,
right?
and use it in this chunk. Someone is loath
Loath
to do something
to do
else.
something.
She
Yes.
is loath to walk into a haunted house, just means
Mhm.
unwilling.
Mhm. 100%. I love that. So let's go through it, Aubrey. So first you said, I don't want to call Mark cheap, but I think he's pretty loath to spend money,
Yeah, this
right?
is me, like, nicely saying, "I've noticed we have a friend that's cheap." I
Yeah.
recognize that that's not a kind thing to say, so I'm sort of trying to say it in a nicer way.
Yeah, exactly. But you're still trying to say it, right? You want to
Yes.
express that in some way.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you say, "I'm frugal, but I try not to be cheap." And you could see that, right? Frugal means I'm careful with my money, I'm not spending extravagantly, but I try
Mhm.
not to be cheap. I try not to do things that would give this negative impression of me.
Right, exactly, exactly. And then we use the word thrifty, same, especially when it comes to clothes. I've always been thrifty, right? Thrifty, meaning you've always been, it's very similar to frugal,
Yeah.
right? We pretty much the same thing. Would you
It's
say
a
frugal and
little
thrifty?
different because I you can't use I don't feel like you can use thrifty when it comes to maybe travel or food. I wouldn't be like, "I'm thrifty with my spending at restaurants." I
Uh,
feel like it's more about repurposing things. So, like
okay.
clothing, if we're trying to mend clothing instead of buy new clothing, we would say thrifty.
Yeah,
Um,
resourcefulness, right?
resourceful if you're resourceful, but I do
Mhm.
feel like in general, we'll call someone thrifty who's just good at saving money, right?
Got it. Got it. Love it. And then I said, you're a generous person. You'd pay every time we go to lunch if I let you, right?
Yeah, and this is that very complimentary adjective, right? It means to give
Mhm.
more of something than necessary or expected. We all have those friends who are so generous, we
Mhm.
would almost have to insist to pay because
Yes.
they're always trying to pay, trying to be very generous.
Yeah, for sure. And everyone has different ideas about money. It's really interesting.
Yes.
This kind of interfaces too with the cultural value that Americans don't talk about money, but we do. We do talk about money, right? It's just that we talk about it in certain ways. Right, Aubrey?
Exactly, right? There are certain subjects we avoid and certain vocabulary we avoid, right? It's interesting.
Yeah.
Certain subjects we really stay away from.
But this is a perfectly viable conversation. So when we
Absolutely.
say these are the 4 topics, money, sex, religion, politics, that's not necessarily true. We have to look at the nuances of how we talk about money. Okay?
Exactly, right? We might
Yeah.
talk about a friend that's cheap, but
Mhm.
the person we're telling that to, we certainly wouldn't ask them, like, how much they make. Like, there are
Yes.
certain things that are
Yes.
so taboo that we would avoid
Yes.
asking.
That's really interesting. It's like the fine
Mhm.
lines of
Right.
how where do you go too far? Aubrey, is that the takeaway for today, or is there anything else we need to know?
I do think that's it. I mean, first of all, there are, and we talk about this a lot, we try to point out these pitfalls in English, words that you might not realize have a negative connotation to help you
Mhm.
avoid giving offense without meaning to. Cheap is
Yes.
one of them, right? I would
Mhm.
definitely never call anyone cheap to their face. If you
Yes.
think they're cheap, that might be something you say to a friend like, maybe we don't invite them to lunch. They're a little cheap.
Yes. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Hey, guys, if you love our style of looking for human connection in every language point, how can you connect in any English speaking situation? Then hit the follow button right here on the show so you don't miss a single episode. Right, Aubrey?
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. Fun episode today, Lindsay.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. We'll talk to you very soon. All
All right. See
right.
you next time.
All right. You take care. Bye.
Bye.